The pen scratched against the leather billfold with a sound like a tiny insect dying. For Chloe Martinez, every sound in the hushed, expensive dining room was magnified. The clink of ice in a water glass, the low murmur of a stock trade, the whisper-light footsteps of her fellow servers. But it was the scratching of that particular pen, a silver Mont Blanc, held in the hand of the man in the corner booth, that made the air crackle. He wasn't just signing a credit card slip. He was passing judgment. And when he finally looked up, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no warmth, only a chilling, dismissive verdict that would ignite a fire she thought had long been extinguished. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Perched on the 47th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, it was a stage where deals were signed, alliances were forged, and fortunes were celebrated. The clientele was a curated list of New York's elite, and the staff were expected to be silent, flawless performers in a nightly ballet of service. Chloe Martinez at 28 felt like a ghost haunting the production. 6 months ago, she had been one of the architects of this theater. Not in the brick-and-mortar sense, but in the human sense. From a corner office, 30 floors higher in the same building, she had been the National Director of Training and Guest Experience for the Aurelian Restaurant Group, the parent company of the Gilded Sparrow, and 24 other high-end eateries across the country. Her masterpiece was a 250-page document bound in navy blue leather, titled The Aurelian Way. It was more than a training manual, it was a philosophy. It detailed everything from the precise angle at which a wine bottle should be presented, 85 to display the label without dripping, to the 3-tiered method of handling a complaint. Listen, empathize, solve. She had spent 2 years of her life on it, conducting focus groups, shadowing staff, and analyzing terabytes of customer feedback data. It had been her baby, her magnum opus. The program she designed had increased customer retention by 18% chain-wide, and more importantly to her, had decreased staff turnover by a staggering 22% because it empowered employees, giving them autonomy and a sense of pride. Then the market had a correction, a polite term for a bloodbath. Aurelian's stock dipped. A new aggressive majority shareholder demanded streamlining. That was another polite term. Chloe, along with her entire department, was deemed a luxury expenditure. The CEO, a man named Arthur Caldwell, whom she had once respected, had given her the news with a pained expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not personal, Chloe. It's just numbers. We have to trim the fat." The fat was her career, her 6-figure salary, and her pride. The severance package was decent, but it wouldn't last forever, not in New York City. Not when her younger sister Sophia was counting on her to help with tuition at NYU. So with a master's degree in hospitality management and the secret authorship of the company's Bible under her belt, Chloe Martinez had swallowed what was left of her pride and put on an apron. She'd used a slightly different version of her name on the application and applied at the flagship location, the Gilded Sparrow. The irony was a bitter pill she choked down daily. The hiring manager, a kind but stressed man named Frank, had glanced at her resume, noted the gap, and listened to her fabricated story about taking time off to care for a sick relative. He'd hired her on the spot, impressed by her poise. He had no idea she had written the very interview questions he was asking her. Now she lived the words she had written. She greeted guests with the warm yet unobtrusive smile detailed on page 17. She recited the specials using the evocative sensory language she'd workshopped on page 54. She was a model employee. She was also invisible, a fact that both protected her and grated on her soul. Her only real confidant at the restaurant was Isabella "Izzy" Garcia, a fiery, perpetually optimistic waitress who had been working service jobs since she was 16. "You're a natural, Chloe," Izzy said, one Tuesday afternoon as they polished silverware before the evening rush. "Like a weird natural. You never get flustered. That guy last night, the one who sent his steak back 3 times, you handled him like you were defusing a bomb. I would have dumped it in his lap." Chloe offered a small smile. "The manual says to maintain a calm and solution-oriented demeanor." Izzy snorted, her hands moving in a blur of white cloth and steel. "Ah, yes, the Holy Bible, written by some corporate stiff who's probably never carried a hot plate in their life. Easy for them to write it, harder for us to live it." Chloe's smile tightened. She wanted to scream, "I am that corporate stiff. I carried 1,000 virtual plates and analyzed 10,000 complaints to make your life easier." But she just said, "I guess." The Tuesday in question started like any other. The lunch service was a steady hum of quiet power. Chloe moved through her section with an efficiency that was second nature. She was in the zone, a state of focused calm, where she could anticipate a diner's need for a water refill before they even reached for their glass. Then at 1:15 p.m. he arrived, Damien Sterling. Even if she hadn't recognized him from the covers of Forbes and Fortune, the shift in the restaurant's atmosphere would have announced him. A hush fell. Frank, the manager, materialized by the host, stand his back suddenly straighter. Sterling wasn't just wealthy. He was a force of nature, a corporate raider known for buying companies, stripping them for parts, and walking away with a bigger fortune. His nickname on Wall Street was the Mortician, because wherever he went, careers died. He was with a younger, nervous-looking man in a suit that was trying too hard. Chloe watched as the host, a young woman named Maya, led them not to a regular table, but to booth 12, the prime real estate corner booth with a panoramic view of the park. It was Chloe's section. Frank hurried over to her. "Chloe, you have Sterling," he said, his voice low and tight. "Be perfect. Not just good. Perfect. The man is famous for being particular." "I understand, Frank," she said, her voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her stomach. As she approached the table, water pitcher in hand, she took him in. He was leaner than in his photos, with sharp, angular features and hair the color of iron filings peppered with gray at the temples. He was dissecting the menu with the same intensity he probably used on a corporate balance sheet. His associate, whom he called Peterson, sat stiffly, eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to the Gilded Sparrow. May I start you with some water? We have still or sparkling." Chloe said, her voice, the perfect modulated tone prescribed on page 22 of The Aurelian Way. Sterling didn't look up. "Sparkling, San Pellegrino, with 1 slice of lime cut into a wedge and not a wheel, and ensure the glass has no lipstick marks. The last place I was at had that problem." Peterson flinched. "Yes, of course, sir." "I was speaking to her," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the air. He finally lifted his gaze to Chloe. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and utterly devoid of emotion. They weren't looking at a person. They were scanning an asset for flaws. "Of course, sir. 1 San Pellegrino lime wedge, pristine glass." Chloe replied, her face a mask of professional calm. She didn't flinch. She had written the protocol for excessively specific guest requests on page 98. Validate the request repeat for clarity and execute flawlessly. The lunch was a minefield. Sterling questioned every ingredient. "The seared scallops," he said, tapping the menu. "Are they diver caught or dredged?" "Diver caught, sir. From Georges Bank," Chloe answered without hesitation. "And the risotto it comes with. Is it made with carnaroli rice or arborio? Carnaroli for its higher starch content and firmer texture. What's the vintage on the Sancerre you're recommending? 2023, sir. It was a spectacular year for the Loire Valley. Crisp, excellent minerality. It will cut through the richness of the risotto beautifully. She answered every question perfectly. It was like an oral exam on a subject she had invented. Peterson looked increasingly impressed, even relieved. Sterling, however, remained impassive. He ordered the scallops while Peterson, after a nod from his boss, ordered the same. As she served the meal, Chloe operated with surgical precision. She placed the plates down from the right, cleared from the left. She poured the wine to the exact level. She anticipated their need for more bread. She was a ghost, a perfect servant, exactly what her manual demanded. Sterling ate in silence, his expression unreadable. When he was finished, he pushed his plate an inch forward. That was the signal. Chloe cleared the table. Was everything to your satisfaction, sir? For the first time, a flicker of something crossed Sterling's face. It wasn't pleasure. It was a kind of cold amusement. It was adequate. He said the word hanging in the air like an insult. He declined dessert and coffee. Just the check. Chloe brought the leather billfold containing the $348.50 check. She placed it discreetly on the table and turned to leave. "Wait," Sterling commanded. She turned back. He was holding his Mont Blanc pen. He looked from her to the check, and then back to her. A long, silent moment passed. He was making her stand there, a deliberate power play. Finally, he scribbled on the merchant copy of the receipt, inserted it back into the billfold, and stood up. Peterson scrambled to his feet. Without another word or a single glance in her direction, Damien Sterling walked out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of silence behind him. Chloe's heart pounded. She waited until he was in the elevator before she dared to approach the table. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the billfold. She looked at the credit card slip first. On the tip line, he had drawn a thick, definitive line through the space and written a large, stark Orsunas. Her breath hitched. It was a slap in the face. A zero tip from a billionaire wasn't just cheap. It was a statement. It was meant to demean. But it was the note he had scrawled at the bottom of the receipt that made the blood drain from her face. 4 words written in sharp, angry script. Staff is clearly untrained. Untrained. The word echoed in the silent, empty space of her mind. He hadn't just insulted her. He had taken a razor blade to the very core of her professional life, to the one thing she had poured her soul into. He had looked at the living embodiment of her work, her masterpiece of service, and declared it worthless. She stood there frozen, the receipt clutched in her hand. Frank and Izzy were watching her from across the room, their faces etched with concern. But Chloe couldn't see them. All she could see were those 4 words. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lie, and in that moment, the ghost of Chloe Martinez, the corporate director, began to stir from her slumber, and a cold, hard anger started to take root. An anger that promised it wouldn't remain silent for much longer. The walk to the employee locker room was the longest of Chloe's life. Each step on the polished concrete floor of the back corridor echoed the word in her head, untrained, untrained, untrained. She felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her back. News in a restaurant travels faster than a spilled tray of drinks. The busboy, the line, cooks, the other servers they all knew. The billionaire in booth 12 had stiffed her. She pushed open the door to the locker room and leaned against the cool metal of her locker, the offending receipt still crumpled in her fist. The 0 felt like a brand, the note a final cruel twist of the knife. Izzy came in moments later, her usual bubbly energy replaced by a quiet fury. "I saw. That son of a... I can't even say it. Chloe, don't let him get to you. He's a miserable old ghoul who probably gets his kicks from making people feel small." "He said I was untrained, Izzy," Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse. "I did everything by the book. Everything." "The book doesn't account for sociopaths," Izzy countered, sitting on the bench beside her. Frank went over to the table after they left, said it was immaculate, not a crumb out of place. He's pissed. He's going to comp the meal from the house so it doesn't mess up your checkout. "That's not the point," Chloe said, finally, unclenching her fist and smoothing out the receipt. She stared at Sterling's sharp, arrogant handwriting. He wasn't just being cheap. This was deliberate. It was a performance. "What do you mean? The questions about the food, the wine making me stand there while he signed the check." "He was testing me. He was looking for a reason to be dissatisfied, and when he couldn't find one, he just made one up." Frank appeared at the doorway, his face grim. "Chloe, you okay? Don't you worry about this. I've been in this business for 30 years. Some people are just black holes. They suck the joy out of everything. You did a perfect job." Chloe looked up at her manager, a man who unknowingly praised her for following rules she herself had written. The irony was a fresh wave of nausea. "Thanks, Frank. Take an extra 15, he said with a sad smile. "And for what it's worth, I'd take a team of untrained people like you over a pro like him any day." But Sterling's insult festered. It was more than a personal slight. It felt like an attack on the entire system she had so painstakingly built, a system designed to create value to foster respect between guest and staff. He had looked at that system and spat on it. The rest of the shift was a blur. Chloe moved like an automaton, her smile pasted on her movements precise, but her mind was a maelstrom. She kept replaying the lunch, every word, every gesture. What had she missed? What had he seen? The answer was chilling. He had seen exactly what he wanted to see. Perfection. And he'd chosen to call it a flaw. The next morning, the reason became devastatingly clear. Chloe was sitting at the tiny kitchenette table in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to help Sophia with a scholarship essay via FaceTime. Sophia's bright, hopeful face was a stark contrast to the grey dread that had settled over Chloe. "So I'm arguing that microloans have a greater long-term impact on community development than large-scale corporate grants." "What do you think?" Sophia asked. "It's a strong thesis, Soph," Chloe said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into her voice. "Just make sure you back it up with solid data." "Always with the data?" Sophia teased. "You're such a nerd." An alert pinged on Chloe's laptop. It was a news notification from the Wall Street Journal, a holdover from her corporate days. The headline made her blood run cold. "Sterling Ventures announces hostile takeover bid for Aurelian Restaurant Group." Her hand flew to her mouth. Sophia's voice faded into the background as Chloe clicked the link, her heart hammering against her ribs. The article laid it all out. Damian Sterling's investment firm, Sterling Ventures, was making a play for a controlling stake in Aurelian. The stock had been undervalued, the article said, and Sterling was a vulture investor, known for acquiring such companies. And then she saw the quote from Sterling himself. It was part of his official statement, his justification for the takeover. "The Aurelian Group has grown complacent," the statement read. "Its brands, while once prestigious, are suffering from a lack of rigorous oversight and systemic failures in staff training. The guest experience has become inconsistent, the so-called Aurelian way, a hollow marketing slogan. My firm sees significant potential value, but only after a complete operational overhaul, which will include streamlining redundancies and implementing a more disciplined, results-oriented service model. Chloe dropped her phone. Sophia's face, frozen mid-sentence, clattered onto the table. Systemic failures in staff training, a hollow marketing slogan. It wasn't a note on a receipt anymore. It was a declaration of war. Her lunch yesterday, the questions, the zero tip. The note, it was all ammunition. He hadn't been a customer. He had been on a reconnaissance mission. He had come to the Gilded Sparrow, the chain's crown jewel, specifically to find fault and build a narrative to devalue the company. He needed to prove the current management was incompetent and that the brand was tarnished, making his lowball offer seem not just reasonable but necessary. And she, Chloe Martinez, the architect of the very system he was maligning, had served him his evidence on a silver platter. Her perfect service had been twisted into a case study for her own professional failure. The word untrained wasn't a random insult from a rude diner. It was a calculated dagger aimed at the heart of the company, and by extension at her. Chloe, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sophia's voice buzzed from the phone on the table. Chloe picked it up, her hand shaking. I'm okay, Soph. Something just came up at work. The lie tasted like ash. This was so much bigger than work. This was about her legacy, her name, even if no one knew it was hers. Sterling was planning to buy Aurelian, gut it, and fire thousands of people like Frank and Izzy, all based on a lie that he had built from a single staged interaction with her. For 6 months, she had been content to be a ghost, to be invisible. She had swallowed her pride, done the work, and tried to forget the woman she used to be. But Damien Sterling hadn't just insulted a waitress, he had awakened the director. She ended the call with Sophia, promising to call her back. Then she walked over to the closet in her bedroom. In the back, tucked behind old winter coats, was a single, sleek, black briefcase. She hadn't opened it since the day she was laid off. With a click, she opened the latches. Inside, nestled amongst files, and a now useless corporate ID, was a pristine, navy blue, leather-bound book. The Aurelian Way, A Philosophy of Service, version 3.0, authored by Chloe Martinez. She ran her fingers over her name, embossed in gold leaf on the inside cover. It was a name Sterling didn't know, a detail he had overlooked. But he hadn't just gotten the manual. She had the data. In the briefcase was a hard drive. On it were the years of research, the raw survey results, the A/B testing protocols for service language, the financial models that proved her system's ROI. She had the emails from Mr. Caldwell, the CEO, praising her work as revolutionary and a cornerstone of our brand identity. She had the before and after numbers, the 18% increase in customer retention, the 22% drop in staff turnover. She had the facts. He had an opinion born of malice and greed. A new kind of fire lit within her. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger of a wronged waitress. It was the cold, focused fury of a strategist whose work had been stolen and perverted. He called her untrained. He called her life's work a hollow slogan. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Damien Sterling wanted to write a new story for the Aurelian Group, a story of failure and decay. But Chloe Martinez realized she was the only one who held the original manuscript with all the author's notes in the margins, and she was about to write a new ending. The slam of her apartment door echoed with a finality that surprised even her. Chloe leaned against it, the cheap wood cool against her back, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The air in her cramped Brooklyn apartment had never felt so charged, so full of potential. For 6 months, this space had been a refuge, a place to lick her wounds and shrink from the world. Now it was a command center. She called in sick to the Gilded Sparrow, her voice a convincing blend of fatigue and apology. Frank was immediately solicitous. "Of course, Chloe. Take all the time you need. Don't worry about a thing here." The kindness in his voice, the genuine concern for the waitress he thought was still reeling from a billionaire's insult, was the only fuel she needed. He and thousands like him were what she was fighting for. Her first act was to resurrect a ghost, her former self. From the back of her bedroom closet, buried under a non-committal pile of off-season clothes, she retrieved a sleek black leather briefcase. It was a relic from her past life, untouched since the day Arthur Caldwell had politely and efficiently dismantled her career. The twin latches clicked open with a sound like a rifle bolt being drawn back. The faint, familiar scent of leather and expensive paper filled the air. Inside lay the artifacts of the woman. She had been a stack of business cards with her name and title, a now useless corporate ID, and a heavy silver pen. And beneath it all a small black external hard drive. Her arc. Plugging it into her laptop, she watched as years of her life flooded the screen. Not just the final, polished version of the Aurelian way, but everything that had gone into its creation. The raw data from thousands of customer surveys, the transcripts from focus groups with nervous, hopeful servers, the financial models, a labyrinth of spreadsheets that projected the return on investment for treating employees with respect. It was all there, a digital monument to a philosophy Damian Sterling had dismissed with a flick of his pen. The next step was reconnaissance. With a mix of trepidation and grim satisfaction, she opened a secure browser and navigated to the Aurelian Group's internal employee portal. Her credentials, Martinez Deer, were saved in the browser. She typed in her old password, Aurelian Way 2024, fully expecting a red "Access Denied" message. Instead, the portal loaded. A wave of contempt washed over her. In their rush to streamline, they hadn't even bothered with basic security protocols like deactivating the access of laid-off senior directors. Their incompetence was now her weapon. For hours, she was a digital phantom, moving silently through the corporate server. She found what she expected to find: chaos. She read panicked email chains between board members, their language a frantic dance around the collapsing stock price. She saw draft after draft of press releases, each one weaker and more defensive than the last. She found a preliminary report, commissioned in response to Sterling's bid, that was already starting to internalize his narrative, suggesting aggressive cost-cutting measures and a re-evaluation of training expenditures. They were getting ready to sacrifice her work on the altar of appeasement. Rage, cold and pure, settled in her bones. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. This was about preventing a massacre. She turned back to her own data, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't just a waitress or a director now. She was a lawyer building an airtight case. She didn't just compile the data. She wove it into an undeniable narrative. The presentation she built was a masterclass in corporate warfare. She began with Sterling's own words, big and bold on the screen. Systemic failures in staff training. A hollow marketing slogan. Then she dismantled them, piece by brutal piece. She created a slide showing the 22% reduction in staff turnover, not as a percentage, but as a human figure, 482 employees who chose to stay. She translated the savings, $4.3 million, into tangible assets, equivalent to the construction and launch of a new flagship restaurant. She visualized the 18% increase in customer satisfaction with a vibrant upward trending graph, but she annotated it with actual quotes from customer surveys, the very quotes she had spent months analyzing. The server was so intuitive it was like she read my mind. One read. "Best service I've had in a decade. You can tell your staff is happy to be there," said another. For the final killing blow, she cross-referenced her system's rollout dates with Aurelian's quarterly earnings reports. The correlation was undeniable. The launch of the Aurelian Way directly preceded a sustained 7% lift in same-store sales, over $50 million in added revenue. She titled the slide, "The Hollow Slogan's ROI." By dawn, she had a 15-slide presentation saved on a tiny USB drive that now felt heavier than a block of gold. But a weapon is useless without a target. An email would be deleted. A call would go unanswered. She needed to face him. She needed to look him in the eye and watch his empire of lies crumble. A frantic search of business journals and news sites gave her the answer. In 3 days, Damian Sterling, the mortician of Wall Street, was giving the keynote address at the Future of Hospitality Symposium. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He was going to stand before his peers and preach about the future of an industry he was actively trying to gut. The venue was the New York Marriott Marquis, a veritable fortress of conference rooms and security guards. Her plan began to form a wild, audacious gambit, born of desperation, and the unique knowledge gleaned from years in the service industry. She knew that events of this scale were ecosystems with their own hierarchies and blind spots. While everyone watched the stage, no one watched the people serving the drinks. She scrolled to the bottom of the event's webpage, past the photos of the speakers and the schedule of panels. She found what she was looking for in the fine print, the list of official vendors. VIP lounge catering, provided by Prestige Event Staffing. A smirk touched her lips. She knew Prestige. They were a major player known for their efficiency and their strict, standardized uniform, plain black trousers, a crisp white button-down shirt, a simple black tie, and polished black non-slip shoes. It was the uniform of the invisible. The next day was spent on acquisition. A trip to a uniform supply store in a dreary corner of Queens provided the clothes. They felt stiff and foreign against her skin. As she looked at her reflection, she saw a stranger, not Chloe the director in her tailored suits, nor Chloe the waitress in her gilded sparrow apron. This was someone new, a soldier donning her camouflage. She practiced holding a serving tray, her movements economical and smooth, just as she'd taught others. She pulled her hair back into a bun so severe it pulled at her temples, erasing her features into a mask of professional anonymity. The morning of the symposium arrived, grey and tense. Chloe felt a tremor of fear in her hands as she clipped on the black tie. Was this insane? What if she was caught? Sterling had the resources to crush her, to bury her in litigation until she was bankrupt and broken. She thought of Izzy's cheerful face. She thought of Frank's tired but decent eyes. She thought of her sister Sophia, so full of hope for a future Chloe was fighting to secure. The fear receded, replaced by a steely resolve. She didn't try the front door of the Marriott. She walked around the block to the service entrance, a humming, chaotic world of clattering carts and shouting voices. She timed her entry perfectly, falling in step behind a group of actual Prestige workers, wheeling in a cart of linen. Clutching a tray of empty water glasses she'd brought from home as a prop, she walked in with the unearned confidence of someone who belonged there. No one blinked. No one questioned. She was just another body filling a uniform. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the hotel's back of house, she followed the signs for the grand ballroom. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained placid, her steps measured. She found the VIP lounge, a hushed, opulent space overlooking the bustling conference lobby. And through the glass doors, she saw him. Damian Sterling. He was the center of a small galaxy of sycophants, a glass of champagne held lightly in his hand. He radiated a smug, unassailable power, and standing right next to him, laughing at something he'd said, was Arthur Caldwell. The sight of her former boss so eagerly courting the man who was threatening to destroy his company sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through her. Chloe took a deep breath, grabbed a tray of fresh champagne flutes from a nearby station, and pushed through the doors. The hum of conversation washed over her. She moved through the room, a silent spectre in black and white. "The entire corporate culture is a liability," Sterling was saying, his voice a confident baritone that cut through the murmur. "They babble about empowerment and holistic service. I care about shareholder value. We will trim the fat, automate the redundancies, and retrain the survivors from the ground up. There's a gold mine in there once you clear out the sentimental nonsense." Caldwell nodded vigorously, his face a mask of fawning agreement. "A bold vision, Damien. Exactly the kind of decisive leadership Aurelian has been missing." Chloe felt a wave of nausea. As she neared the group, ready to make her move, her eyes scanned the room and locked on a figure standing alone by the window. Her breath caught. It was Rebecca Farrow, the feared and respected columnist for the New York Chronicle. Her column, The Farrow Report, was required reading on Wall Street, famous for making and breaking careers. Farrow wasn't just observing. She was hunting her eyes, missing nothing. The plan, already audacious, suddenly expanded. This wasn't just about confronting Sterling anymore. This was about giving the performance of a lifetime to the most important critic in the room. She watched as Sterling finished his conversation and gave Caldwell a dismissive pat on the shoulder, turning to leave. Rebecca Farrow caught his eye, and they exchanged a brief professional nod. This was her moment, the space between Sterling and the ballroom door. Chloe moved, stepping directly into his path, her tray held as steady as a surgeon's scalpel. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the air with practiced precision. He stopped, a flash of irritation crossing his face as his eyes swept over her uniform, dismissing her as a minor obstacle. "What is it? I'm late." "I believe you left something behind at the Gilded Sparrow on Tuesday," she said, her eyes locked on his. She didn't raise her voice. She forced him to lean into her space. Confusion warred with arrogance on his face. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Get out of my way." "You wrote a note," she pressed on, ignoring his command. From the corner of her eye, she saw Rebecca Farrow take a half step closer, her journalist's intuition kicking in. "On the receipt. You said the staff was untrained. I was your server." The recognition dawned, followed by a cold, cruel smirk. He remembered. "Ah, yes. The service was, as I recall, profoundly inadequate. A perfect example of the company's decay. If you have a grievance, take it up with your manager. Some of us have important work to do." He tried to sidestep her, but she mirrored his movement, blocking his path again. The tray in her hand was her shield. "My manager thought my service was flawless," Chloe said, her voice gaining an edge of steel. "Because my service was a textbook execution of the company's official training protocol, a protocol detailed in a manual called The Aurelian Way." Sterling let out a short, derisive laugh. Caldwell, who had drifted over, looked profoundly uncomfortable. "A hollow slogan," Sterling scoffed, repeating the words from his press release. "Meaningless corporate jargon." This was the precipice. Chloe took a breath and plunged. "It's not jargon, Mr. Sterling. It's a 250-page operational strategy with a fully costed implementation plan backed by 2 years of research and development. A strategy that I personally authored." The smirk on Sterling's face froze, then melted away, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. The color drained from Arthur Caldwell's face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Chloe stood taller, her voice ringing with a clarity and authority that hadn't been heard in months. It filled the sudden, shocked silence in the lounge. My name is Chloe Martinez. For 3 years, I was the National Director of Training and Guest Experience for the Aurelian Restaurant Group until my position was deemed redundant. The untrained waitress you insulted and stiffed is the architect of the very system you are using as your excuse to dismantle a company for profit. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small USB drive, holding it between her thumb and forefinger like a detonator. She broke eye contact with Sterling, turning her head slightly to ensure she was in Rebecca Farrow's line of sight. The reporter was now standing only feet away, her expression one of electrifying focus. This hollow slogan, Chloe announced to the room, is directly responsible for a 22% reduction in staff turnover and a documented $50 million lift in revenue. Mr. Sterling's entire hostile takeover is predicated on a lie he concocted after I served him a perfect meal. She finally looked at Farrow, a silent invitation in her eyes. He has an opinion. I have the data to prove him wrong. The VIP lounge was utterly silent. Damian Sterling, the corporate mortician, the man who moved markets with a whisper, was speechless, his face a thunderous mask of pure fury. He had been ambushed, exposed, and humiliated, not by a rival firm in a boardroom, but by an invisible woman in a server's uniform in the middle of his own victory lap. Rebecca Farrow stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. She walked right past the stunned billionaire and stopped in front of Chloe. "Ms. Martinez Farrow," said, her voice a low, urgent hum. "I think you and I should find a quiet place to talk. Right now." The silence in the VIP lounge was a vacuum, pulling all the air and sound out of the room. For a heartbeat, everyone was frozen, a tableau of shock and disbelief. Damian Sterling's face was a canvas of apoplectic rage, his skin turning a blotchy red. Arthur Caldwell looked as if he might faint his eyes wide with the horror of a man who has just watched his own career get torpedoed. It was Rebecca Farrow who broke the spell. With the predatory grace of a hawk spotting its prey, she moved. She put a firm, proprietary hand on Chloe's arm, effectively creating a shield around her. "This way," she commanded, her voice, low and sharp, meant for Chloe alone. She began steering Chloe towards a side door marked "Private," leaving the smouldering ruins of Damian Sterling's reputation behind them. As they walked, a cacophony erupted in their wake. Murmurs turned into frantic whispers. Cell phones were already being raised. Sterling finally found his voice, a strangled roar of "Security, stop her!" But it was too late. Farrow, a titan of the industry in her own right, simply flashed a press badge at a bewildered guard and pulled Chloe into the sanctuary of an empty meeting room, locking the door behind them. The room was bland and corporate, but it felt like a bunker in the midst of a battle. The adrenaline that had been singing in Chloe's veins began to ebb, leaving a profound, bone-deep tremor in its place. She had done it. She had faced the dragon and walked through the fire. Now she had to deal with the burns. "Okay, Miss Martinez," Farrow said, her professional demeanor taking over. Her eyes were alight with an intensity that was almost as intimidating as Sterling's fury. "Don't talk to anyone else. Don't answer your phone. Right now, your story belongs to me. Show me what you've got." With slightly trembling hands, Chloe took the USB drive and plugged it into Farrow's slim laptop. She clicked open the presentation file. "It's all here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. For the next hour, Chloe walked Rebecca Farrow through her life's work. Farrow was no easy audience. She was incisive, skeptical, and relentless. She interrupted with sharp questions, probing for weaknesses in the data. "How can you be certain This 7% lift is directly correlated to your program and not market trends, Farrow asked, pointing at a graph. Because I ran control groups, Chloe countered, flipping to a hidden appendix slide. 30 restaurants in the test group, 10 in the control. The control group, which continued with the old training model, saw only a 1.2% lift in the same period. The variable was the training. The variable was the Aurelian way. Farrow's skepticism slowly melted away, replaced by a dawning, ravenous excitement. She saw the emails from Caldwell praising Chloe's revolutionary work. She saw the raw data, the spreadsheets, the proof. This wasn't just a story about a rude billionaire. This was a meticulously documented case of corporate sabotage with a hero who had been hiding in plain sight. As Chloe finished, Farrow was already typing furiously on her phone. "I'm breaking the news now," she said, without looking up. "Just the headline. It's too big to wait for the morning print." She showed Chloe her screen. Rebecca Farrow. At Future of Hospitality, a bombshell. Source claims Damien Sterling's takeover bid for Aurelian ARG is based on fabricated claims of poor training. Source: the woman who wrote the training manual, currently working as a waitress at their flagship. Story developing. The Farrow Report. Waitress vs. Billionaire. Chloe stared at the tweet. Seeing her struggle her entire life for the past 6 months, condensed into 280 characters, was surreal. Waitress vs. Billionaire. It seemed so simplistic, yet so powerful. Before she could even process it, the notifications began to pour in: retweets, replies, mentions from other major journalists. The story was no longer hers. It belonged to the world. The full article hit the Chronicle's website just after midnight. It was a masterpiece of journalistic destruction. Farrow had juxtaposed a professional smiling headshot of Chloe from her director, days against a candid long-lens photo of Sterling storming out of the symposium, his face a mask of fury. The headline was devastating. The waitress who wrote the manual inside Damien Sterling's deceitful bid, and the woman who exposed it with a single meal. The story laid out every detail: the calculated cruelty of the $0 tip, the untrained note, the stunning reveal at the symposium, and the irrefutable data from Chloe's hard drive. Farrow had even gotten a panicked no comment from Arthur Caldwell, and a blustering, threatening denial from Sterling's PR team, which she printed in full, letting their empty words hang themselves. Chloe's phone, which she'd finally turned back on, began to melt down. Texts and voicemails poured in from former colleagues, friends, and even strangers. The most important one came just after 1 a.m. It was Izzy. "Chloe Martinez, what is happening?" The text screamed, followed by a link to Farrow's article. "I'm sitting here with Frank. Our jaws are on the floor. You wrote the Bible. You're a secret corporate genius. I knew you were too good to be true. I am buying you so many drinks. We are so proud of you." Tears pricked Chloe's eyes. This was real. The respect she had been denied, the validation she had craved, was pouring in from all corners. The fallout for Sterling was immediate and catastrophic. By morning, his bid for Aurelian was toxic. Major institutional investors in his own firm, spooked by the reputational damage, began demanding answers. A rival private equity firm issued a public statement expressing their full confidence in the Aurelian Group's current operational strategy and award-winning training program. It was a subtle, brilliant knife in Sterling's back. The Aurelian board of directors, who had been days away from capitulating, suddenly found themselves on solid ground, buoyed by a wave of public support and a soaring stock price. 2 days after the article dropped, Chloe's phone rang. The caller ID read Arthur Caldwell. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message, a grim satisfaction settling over her. He called back. This time she answered, putting the call on speaker as she brewed a cup of coffee in her small kitchen. "Chloe." Caldwell began, his voice strained and stripped of its usual confidence. Chloe, I am so profoundly sorry. What I did, letting you go, it was the single worst business decision of my career. I was a fool and a coward. I let the numbers on a spreadsheet blind me to the actual value you created. Chloe remained silent, letting him squirm. The board and I have unanimously voted to reject Sterling's bid. He continued, rushing to deliver the good news. We've also voted to make this right. We want to offer you your job back. Not just your old job. We want to create a new position for you. Executive Vice President of Human and Guest Experience Strategy, reporting directly to me. Name your salary, Chloe. Whatever it is, we'll pay it. Please, come home. The offer hung in the air, glittering and seductive. It was everything she had wanted, everything she had dreamed of for 6 agonizing months. The title, the money, the recognition, vindication. But as she looked around her small apartment, the war room that had launched a corporate coup, she realized she wasn't that person anymore. The woman who wanted her old job back had been a ghost. The woman on the phone now was a general who had just won a war. "Thank you for the offer, Arthur," she said finally, her voice calm and measured. "I am genuinely grateful that the board sees the value in my work now. But I have to decline." The stunned silence on the other end of the line was more satisfying than any salary. "I can't come back," she explained, not out of spite, but out of a newfound clarity. "Because the philosophy I fought to defend is one you and the board were willing to abandon at the first sign of trouble. You don't just need a new EVP, Arthur. You need a new way of thinking. You need to embed this philosophy so deeply into your company's DNA that it can't be streamlined away by the next bully with a big checkbook." She took a sip of her coffee. "I'm starting my own firm, Martinez Hospitality Consulting. We're going to help companies build resilient, human-centric cultures that are profitable because they're ethical, not in spite of it. I'm going to prove that happy employees are a company's greatest asset." She paused, letting the idea land. "And the Aurelian Group can be my first client. My consulting fee will be substantial, but I promise you, it will be worth it." 3 months later, the frosted glass door of a bright, airy office in Soho read, "Martinez Hospitality Consulting." Inside, Chloe stood before a whiteboard, sketching out a new framework. Her first and biggest client, the Aurelian Group, had agreed to her terms without negotiation. She was now in the process of rebuilding their corporate culture from the top down, with the full, unwavering support of the board. Her recommendations had been swift and decisive. Frank, with his decades of on-the-ground experience and loyalty, was now the regional director of operations for the entire Northeast. Izzy, with her infectious passion and natural leadership, was now heading up the national training program at Aurelian HQ, working alongside Chloe to revise and expand the Aurelian way. One crisp autumn evening, Chloe was meeting Izzy for dinner, not in a staff room, but at a competitor's Michelin-starred restaurant where they were treated like royalty. As they laughed over a bottle of expensive Sancerre, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. "Just aced my economics midterm. The professor used a case study about stakeholder versus shareholder value." It was that crazy story from the news about the billionaire who got his hostile takeover wrecked by a waitress he refused to tip. Sound familiar? Said it was the best example of asymmetric information and reputational leverage he'd ever seen. "So proud of you, big sis. You're literally a textbook case." Chloe smiled a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She looked across the table at Izzy, then out the window, at the endless, glittering promise of the New York City skyline. The journey had started with a single, humiliating act, designed to make her feel worthless. But it had ended here. She wasn't a ghost, a waitress, or a victim. She was a textbook case, an architect, a CEO. She had discovered that her true value was not something a man like Damien Sterling could ever take away, because it was something he was incapable of ever understanding. That single dismissive act, a zero on a tip line, was meant to end a conversation, to declare a person worthless. But it ended up starting a revolution. Chloe Martinez's story is a powerful reminder that there is immense value, expertise, and dignity in every job. It shows us that the person serving your coffee or checking you into a hotel might just be the unheralded genius who designed the entire system. Her refusal to be silenced proves that one voice armed with the truth and a little bit of courage can indeed challenge the powerful and reshape their own destiny. It's a testament to the fact that your real worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, but by the integrity of your own work. If Chloe's story of resilience and vindication resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and empower. And we want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up and claim your worth? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters.